Hello, I'm Susan Salome, Research and Reports Coordinator with CenterWatch. Welcome to today's webinar on choosing the right CRO, global or local. Here's what to consider. This webinar is brought to you by OCT Clinical Trials. OCT is one of the leading local CROs in the Eastern European region. They have been conducting clinical studies of different phases and indications for both big pharma and small biotech companies since 2005. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Irina Petrova is Director of Clinical Operations at OCT. Irina is a medical doctor with a degree in psychiatry and over 15 years of international clinical research experience. At OCT, Irina is responsible for the overall supervision of the clinical projects, assigning and training project teams, controlling their workload, and assessing their performance. She is joined by Anna Yanaeva, Director of Business Development at OCT. Anna is responsible for communication with sponsors, the preparation of proposals and study budgets, and making sure that all sponsors' needs are met by OCT. Thank you for joining us today. Ladies, you may go ahead.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Susan. Hello, everyone, and once again, thank you for joining us today on the webinar. Just a couple of technical notes before moving on. We expect the session to last about 30 minutes, followed by a live question and answer session. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the presentation, and the questions will be addressed at the end. To ask the question, simply type it in the area provided and press enter. Questions will not be viewable to other attendees. All right, so we are ready to dive in. So, as you know, nowadays, clinical research market is saturated with diverse types of companies, niche or boutique CROs, global players, local or regional organizations that are helping pharmaceutical and biotech sponsors bring their compounds to the market. And because we at OCT hear different opinions from sponsors all over the world about their cooperation with CRO partners, we know that some companies may have different stereotypes too. So we decided to bring up this topic, how to choose the right CRO, global or local. We thought it would be really interesting to obtain the real feedback from sponsors who worked with either big global or smaller local CROs and find out what the experience was like. So we conducted a survey. We have prepared a list of questions about which CRO types respondents tend to work with, what the most common inconveniences and main benefits they face, what were the key factors that influenced the CRO choice. We sent out the questionnaires to both small and mid-sized biotech companies and big pharma. Our respondents were clinical operations people, chief medical officers, procurement and outsourcing specialists, and CEOs. And I would like to start with sharing the results with you. First of all, we wanted to know what the sponsors' preferences are in terms of types of CROs to collaborate with. As you can see from the diagram, just a bit over half of respondents have chosen to work with global CROs, and 46% of respondents chose to work with local companies. And of course, it was important to understand how satisfactory was sponsors' experience with the chosen partners. And we were happy to see that over half of respondents were satisfied. However, 45% of them were to some extent unsatisfied. Now, of course, we wanted to know which exactly type of CRO brought more or less satisfactory experience to their sponsor. And on this slide, you can see the allocation between global and local players. We asked the respondents to share their major concerns when working with their selected partners. And as you can see, most of the respondents have chosen the following factors that caused concerns in their cooperation with the global CROs. That is communication, then speed of decision-making, and cost. As for the sponsors working with local CROs, surprisingly, some of them also selected cost and communication as factors causing them some level of concern. Among other concerns, sponsors that choose to work with local CROs highlighted quality, access to technologies and clinical tools, and availability of resources. But of course, we didn't concentrate on the negative side only, and we asked the respondents to share the benefits of their cooperation too. As the diagram shows, the major benefit highlighted by sponsors cooperating with the global CROs is global reach. In addition to that, respondents consider their cooperation with global CRO partners beneficial in terms of brand recognition, availability of in-house services, access to technologies, and high quality. Sponsors that chose to work with local CROs point out the following benefits. First of all, knowledge of local regulations, then cultural expertise, which is also very important, competitive pricing, speed of decision-making, flexibility, and individual approach to clients. So having analyzed the results of the survey, we came to some interesting conclusions that we believe can be helpful to our listeners. Some of you might get rid of the negative stereotypes about both global and local CROs and even use some practical advice that we will share today to make your collaboration with CRO partners positive and efficient. So I'm happy to pass the word to Irina, who will tell you more about how you can apply our findings to your CRO selection process.
Thank you, Anna. I would like to start with the confirmation that there are three main criteria used for assessment of CRO performance, and it's inequality, timelines, and cost. And equality is undeniable always on the first place. Whatever CRO you select, big, small, or middle size, will it work at a high or low budget? Will they use technology in the study or not? All this should not affect data quality and integrity, and definitely should not have an impact on study results. Having recognized this challenge, in order to be competitive on the international and also on the local market, to be compliant with the industry standards, local CROs have no choice but to follow the path already paved by the global companies. The path leading to well-written SOPs, addressing most recent regulatory changes, use of advanced technologies and e-clinical solutions such as clinical trial management system, electronic trial master file, electronic clinical outcome assessment, including ePro, risk-based monitoring platforms. Eager to excel and get repeat business, local CROs are trying really hard to deliver the quality which may earn them reputation and brand recognition. Imagine that loss of a single sponsor may have dramatic consequences for a local CRO, especially if this sponsor contributes a significant proportion into a total revenue of the company. It makes local CRO much more sponsor-oriented and flexible. They try to give each project an individual attention and find a personal approach to every client, which let them establish trustful and long-lasting relationship. Such approach is really appealing for smaller pharmaceutical companies and biotechs who sometimes complain of that their projects do not receive appropriate care from the global service providers. So a combination of well-developed, formalized, standard operating procedures, mature quality assurance system, access to modern technology, and personal approach creates perfect conditions for doing trials together with local CROs. Being smaller in size and loyal to the client, local CROs apply a lot of efforts to keep the project team initially assigned for the project, preventing disruption of the project team. It makes trainings a key element of quality assurance system more targeted, and no important information is lost during staff transition. For instance, in our company, trainings are still done in a personal, almost individual modality, rather than through audio or video recording with further testing. Of course, we also do tests, but each employee has a chance to talk to the trainer in person and clarify remaining questions, which we believe is a very important part of the education. Being deeper immersed into the local environment, local CROs are more culturally sensitive. They have better understanding of patient pathways. They understand healthcare system and treatment standards in the countries they operate. And this usually results not only in quicker enrollment, but also in better subject compliance, which in its turn leads to a better quality of the data. It is obviously expected that at some point I should say something negative about local CROs, and I shall, but I would rather do it by showing you a table where we try to list and address main concerns related to selection of a local CRO. So actually we face these concerns and address them regularly when we participate in bidding process. The first concern we usually face relates to absence of or gaps in standard operating procedures and processes. So the key point here is that you should not only review SOPs, working procedures, risk management policies and procedures, which can be actually done during remote audit, but also you should make interview with key CRO personnel, head of departments, project managers, regulatory managers, quality assurance people, and CRAs. Indeed, the company may have really nice procedures, well written, capturing everything, but if employees cannot reproduce them, it means they just don't follow them. It's only on paper and not a part of their routine. So it means that the system simply doesn't work. The second concern usually raised during biddings is lack of experience in different areas. It can be any area like therapeutic indication, or maybe some particular study design like bioequivalence or bioavailability study, use of particular vendors, and many others. Indeed, having limited project pipeline, being smaller in size, local CRO may not have had necessary experience in the past. If this is really critical, you should pay a lot of attention to the information CRO provides about their experience, as details about prior studies. Maybe ask for confirmation from the open regulatory databases if the prior studies were indeed conducted. If it's not that critical, still ask the CRO how they are going to address these deficiencies. Maybe they assign project team members who gained this experience in the previous companies. Or maybe they want to organize a thorough training in the therapeutic area or other area, experience in which is missing. Or they want to implement some additional procedures to make sure that the deficiency is covered. So the proposed plan may sound really reasonable, and if it's logic, then we believe that this concern is adequately addressed. Easy to remember that the third potential risk is about third parties, contracted by and managed by CRO. R2 highlighted sponsors' responsibilities for the third parties, and it means that the CRO's procedures on vendor selection and management should be also checked for health and viability. Do they have a list of preferred service providers? Do they perform system audits of third parties? If so, how often reassessment is done? What routine management of third parties look like? Is the assessment of risks related to third parties is being performed on a regular basis? Is the vendor's performance assessment is done, and this information is kept for future reference? Many interesting question, isn't it? Okay, the fourth one is about finances. Smaller companies, I've already mentioned that, often depend on one or two big projects. So you can imagine what if something happens to these projects. For instance, they are put on hold or terminated prematurely. The smaller CRO may start experiencing financial problems such as lack of cash flow, which means that they won't have enough money to pay salaries and pass through costs. And not to put your project at risk, it is important to understand how financially stable the CRO is. You can do it by requesting the basic financial information in a format of financial statement for the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years, and ask about number of sponsors which bring the most revenue. Also, please look carefully through the budget proposal and ask yourself about the following. Whether the scope of services is sufficient so that you won't receive requests to cover out-of-scope activities shortly after beginning of the study. Whether pass-through costs, which are normally invoiced at actual expense, are sufficient so that you won't end up the study with a cost twice higher than in the initial budget. Whether the grant is competitive, so that after a series of site qualification visits, you won't be asked to double it. Let me not stop on the cost any further because Anna will go deeper into the topic at a later stage. So finally, even if all of your concerns are successfully addressed, don't forget about references. It will give you a good general impression about overall CRO performance. I really hope that you found this information useful for your future bids, and let's move to the cost as promised.
Thank you very much, Irina. You're absolutely right that sponsors should pay special attention to the quotes and budgets provided by CROs to make sure that the calculations are realistic. So I believe it is important to elaborate a bit on the possible hidden costs in the CRO budget. As you know, budget of any study consists of the two major parts: professional fee, that is cost of CRO services, and pass-through costs. So if we look at the services part, most of the CRO budgets would be unitized, but sometimes you do not get the information about how exactly the unit has been calculated, how many hours are included into one unit, what FTE of each CRO team member is allocated to each activity. So in order to avoid the situation when during the study CRO gets back to you with a list of out-of-scope activities and asks for a change order, make sure to request information about hours and FTE included in the budget during the bidding process, so before you sign the contract. As for PDC, the pass-through costs, there are several things to be considered. First of all, make sure that you discuss with the CRO how you are going to deal with currency fluctuations. This is applicable for local CROs mostly. Secondly, an experienced CRO should make sure that they include the realistic CRA travel and accommodation expenses, as those might comprise quite a big part of the study budget. Same for the logistic costs. In some studies, a central lab, for example, selected by sponsor might be located in the other part of the world, and thorough planning and realistic budgeting of biosample shipment costs will help you avoid unpleasant surprises during the study. Experienced local CROs should also know very well, and they should inform sponsor about some regional specifics that might influence the budget. For example, if you are planning a study in Russia and need to import the study drug from another country, you should know that amount of customs fees depends on the planned market price of the IMP, and of course as well as on the amount of IMP to be imported and the number of imports. So your CRO partner should discuss with you and include the appropriate cost into the pass-through costs part of the budget. You know that some studies require local purchase of concomitant medication and study supplies. An experienced CRO should be able to negotiate the price for those and take over the local purchase process. In addition to that, we advise to pay special attention to the PIs and site grant fees that are included into the CRO budget. Make sure that per-patient grant fees were based on the feasibility analysis conducted by the CRO prior to study budget calculation. There might be some regional specifics on how the grant is calculated. For example, in CIS countries, including Russia, per-patient grant fee is usually divided into two parts: investigator's fee and site fee. Also, grant fee might or might not include some of the study procedures. For example, normally local laboratory costs are included into the grant fee, but costs of such procedures as MRI or computed tomography are not covered by the grant and should be budgeted separately. Another important thing to consider is whether all third parties' costs are included into the study budget in full. Irina has already covered it a bit, and I just wanted to add that an experienced CRO should thoroughly analyze the scope of activities included into the vendor's budget, such as central labs, warehouses, central reviewers, and others. If vendors require advance payments, for example, for the purchase of ePro tablets, CRO should negotiate the same payments conditions with sponsor in order to avoid delays of the study start. So all in all, even though local CROs' budgets usually seem to be more attractive, thanks to their ability to negotiate the lower patient grant fees with investigators and sites and accelerate some stages of the study, please do not forget that some global players are often able to provide additional financial incentives, along with funding and investment options, and this is something that local CROs are usually not able to do. It is obvious for all of you that time is money, and sponsors are losing potential profit every day they spend in clinical trials. However, we should remember that trying to save on CRO work can result in negative consequences for the sponsor company. Speeding up enrollment timelines, though, can help decrease the part of the CRO budget that depends on the study duration, such as project management or site management. Irina, would you like to elaborate on the factors that influence study timelines?
Yeah, sure. There are 3 study periods when CRO may move study timelines into one or another direction, depending on how good their performance is. It's startup, which brings us to one of the most crucial study milestones, first patient in. It's enrollment, bringing us to another important milestone, last patient in, and closure period ending with finalization of clinical study report and file handover to the sponsor. There are obvious cases when global CRO cannot be replaced with the local ones, first of all because you will need a huge lot of them. I mean, big studies spreading over 1, 2, 3, 4 continents and dozens of countries. In majority of other cases, local CROs may successfully compete with the global ones. Deeper understanding of local regulations, thorough and informal approach to the expertise of essential study documents comprising submission package help local CROs to minimize potential deficiencies and reduce study approval timelines. Since study approval process is a critical path influencing the overall startup time, it makes local expertise a very precious asset. The same can be said about study logistics. According to our experience, global logistics service providers are way too slower and more rigid than logistics specialists working in smaller companies and local CROs. It is not a rare case when our CRO was asked to help with the customs clearances or some other logistics things because global vendor confused something in the documents or got stuck at some point and their local representatives were really helpless. Positioning themselves as local experts, local CROs try to build personal relationships not only with the sponsors but also with investigators and key opinion leaders, and it gives them competitive advantage during enrollment period. Local knowledge also helps to select the best possible sites in the country and make more precise prognosis of enrollment rate. Global CROs have databases. Local CROs have databases too, but the latter also have an opportunity to share their opinion about sites, investigators, CRA performance, and vendor performance among project managers, because smaller size of the company allows them to do so. Again, for instance, in our company, we held monthly face-to-face project review meetings, at which, besides other things, project managers discuss challenges they are facing and overcoming, give information about good and bad sites, present issues and cases they're resolving in their projects, and so on. This practice helps to keep the core of the clinical department within a single information loop. In order to confirm my statements about recruitment, I would like to demonstrate enrollment analytics taken from our studies in Russia, which were done in collaboration with the global and mid-sized CROs. As you can see, enrollment rate and duration of enrollment period, respectively, is much higher than in Russia than in the rest of the countries. So the figures talk for themselves. And I should also comment that the rest of the countries also included some top enrolling regions such as Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, and other Eastern European countries famous for good enrollment. So this is not just the regional factor which played a role. And on the top of it, I would also like to add that we often receive requests to propose patient referral services on our territories in global trials conducted by global CROs. So by seeing these requests regularly, we conclude that pharmaceutical companies recognize the strength of a local CRO. To continue the topic of cases and to end our presentation with a starting point, remember one size doesn't fit all, I would like to give you an example of a very successful collaborative study recently completed by us. This was a big challenging study in oncology and lung cancer, involving European and Asian sites in 13 countries. Our company was responsible for Russia only. Some other regions which we cover were also involved, but unfortunately was not managed by us. So, as you can see from the distribution of patients and sites, Russia was considered a promising country from the very beginning. 1/3 of patients at only 20% of sites were planned to be enrolled in Russia. Feasibility was done by us as well, and initially we asked for a bigger quota of patients because the country had so great a potential, but the sponsor limited us just to 1/3 of patients. A combination of CROs and sponsors' SOPs was used. Some general processes owned by the global CRO had to be harmonized between all parties. For instance, it concerned deviation reporting and databasing and documents filing. To cover that, special project-specific procedures were developed, whereas project management, monitoring, logistics, and regulatory support provided by us were done according to our SOPs. So the sponsor decided that for such a strategic region, they need an individual approach. And as you can see from the study metrics, it was the right decision. Not only the timelines, which I will show later, but also key performance indicators were on a very good level, in many cases exceeding those of a global CRO. And here is the timelines. Majority of milestones were completed ahead of time, maybe not that significant as enrollment, but as for enrollment, we completed it 7 months ahead of a global target and 2 months earlier than it was initially set for Russia. We have chosen this case not to demonstrate how great we are, but by this case, first of all, we wanted to emphasize how beneficial for the sponsor such collaboration can be. It was indeed a win-win situation.
Thanks a lot, Irina. I think these real-life examples that you have shared only confirm that sometimes we need to think outside the box and realize that the secret of the study's success might hide in the combination and joint forces of the two different companies, different partners. Global and local CROs can work very efficiently together to deliver the best results to the sponsor. That's actually about it from our side. Back at you, Susan.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, now is your opportunity to have your questions answered by our presenters. Please remember that this portion of the conference is also being recorded. As mentioned at the beginning of the session, to ask a question, please use the questions and answers panel on your screen, type a question in the area provided, and press enter. Back to you, ladies.
Thank you, Susan. I can see some questions already, so I will start from those. One of the listeners is asking what is ROW, which appeared on one of the slides. It is rest of the world. So at the case study that Irina has commented on, there was OCT covering Russia and then another CRO covering rest of the world. Another question we have is, do you specialize in any therapeutic areas or indications? And I can answer that too. So OCT does not specialize in any therapeutic areas, any indications, any phases. We do diverse types of studies, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, post-marketing studies as well. And we are so to say agnostic in terms of therapeutic areas. We cover more than 20 of them and can easily pick up a new one. One more question is, what exactly do you mean by a local CRO? I think it's a very good question. Irina, would you like to comment on this?
Before we planned this presentation, there was a lot of discussion about how to define local CRO. So for ourselves, we define it like a company operating in a certain region, covering maybe not just one country, but several countries, like, for instance, several countries in Eastern Europe, like our CRO, or maybe several countries in South America and the like. The company, which is not really small, like 10, 5 employees, The company of a size 100 to 100 employees in total. That's actually what we meant by local CRO.
Thank you, Irina. One more question. Does OCT manage device studies? I can answer that. So we have had experience conducting studies of medical devices too, along with other therapeutics or biosimilars, biological drugs, small molecules. So yes, we do such studies as well. One more question. Do you run trials in Russia only? I can answer this. Well, the headquarters of the company is in Russia, and OCT is a Russian company initially, but we have 7 more offices in Eastern Europe. So we do clinical trials also in Ukraine, Belarus, in Georgia, Bulgaria, Baltic states, in Serbia and Moldova. So not only Russia. One more question. Do you have other experience of working in partnership with a global CRO? Irina, would you like to answer this?
Yes, so these cases were presented on the slide about enrollment. So we do collaborative studies a lot because Russia and Ukraine, so these are big regions, and this was not only just that sponsor who did the lung cancer study wanted a special attention, special care about these regions. So we did that studies in other indications such as rheumatology, rheumatoid arthritis. Now we have an ongoing study in erectile dysfunction. We also did a study in ovarian cancer. So, but more or less, these studies are organized in the same way. So each CRO uses their own SOPs and those processes which are common for both CROs and sites all over the study. For that processes, special project-specific procedures are developed.
Thank you, Irina. I think that's it from our listeners. Oh no, there is one more question, just in time. Does OCT do BA or BE studies in healthy volunteers or patients? Thank you. I can respond to this too. So we do bioequivalent studies, and if you mean bioavailability by BA, we do that as well. We do bioequivalent studies in both healthy volunteers and patients. Well, normally bioequivalent studies are done in healthy volunteers, but sometimes they can be more complicated and they need to be done in patients, and we do that as well. Same for the phase 1 studies too. I think that's it. If nobody wants to ask one more question, then we're done. I just want to thanks everyone once again, and we really hope that you enjoyed our webinar today and were able to find some small insights that you will be able to apply next time to select the perfect CRO partner. I wish you good luck in your upcoming studies, and we're always happy to help. You can see my contact details here, and please feel free to contact us with any queries.
Thank you very much. On behalf of CenterWatch and OCT Clinical Trials, I would like to thank our participants for joining us today. Please be sure to fill out the survey at the conclusion of this webinar. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. This now concludes today's webinar. Have a great day, and I hope you join us again in the future. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.